Lara and Sebastian. So.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're speaking from Geneva. I'm Sebastian Mikosz, very pleased to talk to you. I'm with Lara Maughan, who is our head of slots. We have a very quick couple of slides on the slots challenge, if I may say so, that we'll go quickly through, and then we're of course very keen on asking all your questions. So slot challenge and the slot issue or slot regulations, everything that goes under slot is one of our big topics since the crisis started, and this is why we're bringing quite a technical topic to your attention in order to explain you why IATA is advocating for this challenge very, very intensely. And just to give you a broader context really quickly, it's difficult for us not to explain you the slots in a broader context of global connectivity, because actually there is a straightforward relation between connectivity, the possibility of competing, the demand for traffic, and slot. Slot is a result of existing connectivity. And if you could please just have a look at this one graph, which illustrates the impact of this crisis on our connectivity. So I'll not elaborate on the crisis because, we've been sharing with you quite a number of informations and data on how it has affected the airlines. But now we can start measuring, when we are getting much closer to the end of 2020, what exactly connectivity means. And in order to illustrate you this, we just selected this one data. In the last 20 years, connectivity has doubled. What it means for us, among others, is that you have 22,000 city pairs which were connected by a direct flight. And it took this 20 years for airlines to build networks that build these pairs of city, which allows this connectivity. And of course, when it was done, it was an investment, and this investment resulted in few airports. I mean, a number of them, Lara will say more about it, being congested and being then regulated for slots. That was allowing our airlines to provide a lot of offering for passengers and to compete. Actually, that was allowing the passengers also to benefit from this competition. In 2 days, we'll have a detailed report on connectivity, but please, I would like to attract your attention to the fact that over this year, we have lost the connectivity that it took 20 years to build, because now, as we speak, we lost 8,000 city pairs that are not served today. So actually, we have reduced the market of connectivity, which means we have affected passengers' capacity of selecting. And our position as IATA, and working for the industry and representing the industry, is that the more connectivity there is, the more city pairs, the more flights, the better it is for the passengers, because they have the possibility of choosing, and therefore they will be keen on restarting demand and restoring demand. And we've discussed what to do to achieve it. And if I could ask for the next slide, Tony. So the best answer to that is to provide airlines flexibility, because this flexibility will be will be de facto a flexibility for the consumer. That's going to be allowing airlines to risk putting more flights, to respond in extremely difficult situation while being in a very, very, I really choose my words, but in a desperate situation, in what we call a survival mode, to start still fighting to have more flights and being able to bring those flights piece by piece and connecting those cities. And we would like to remind it because, for us, airlines are in the center of the air transport system. If we are the ones who sell the tickets, and therefore it's vital for us to be to have the possibility of being as reactive and agile as possible, and ultimately bring as many passengers back. So this is what we obtained in 2020 through the slot waiver, and this is now what we are advocating for the next summer. And allow me just to shift to the next slide and maybe give you what is, in our view, the biggest difference that we have with some of the airline stakeholders, because we all now have the debate about the vaccine, and we in IATA believe that the vaccine is a game changer, and the vaccine, there will be multiple vaccines, they will come. We are ready to support logistically, and we have made separate press release about this to support the logistics around the vaccine. But the vaccine will take many months to roll out, to be approved, to be distributed. So we believe that what happened in 2020 will continue in 2021, which means that the industry will not be maybe in survival mode, but will very, very slowly enter the restart mode. Please remember that it's our season starts in March. So we already know how many markets will be closed even by the end of 2021, but we already know which markets will be closed first quarter and second quarter of 2021. Therefore, we see that it's going to go faster than in 20. There will be some bounce back. That was our assumption since many months, because in all the projections and in all the forecasts you saw on the traffic, we always assumed that the vaccine will be ready from June 2021 onward, and we keep this position, which shows that we need really flexibility for 2021 season summer to allow to restore and fight for passengers' demand. How it's going to be, what are we asking precisely? What do we understand under the word of flexibility? I'll ask Lara to explain you further, and I'll then conclude in few words. Thanks very much, Lara. Please, if you could go to the details of our expectations.
Thank you, Sebastian. Hello, everyone. I'm Lara. I lead the airport slots team here in IATA. I've spoken to a number of you before about this issue that we have and why we have slots. Indeed, always talking about the scarcity in airport capacity, a supply side issue. Unfortunately, now the issue we have in terms of slots is certainly not one of airport congestion. It's the scarcity of passengers, a lack of demand, and so slots are no longer about managing congestion right now, because there simply isn't any. You've probably heard a lot this year about the airport slots issues. You've heard from the airlines, the airports, and other stakeholders. Specifically, I'm sure you've heard a lot, as Sebastian says, about slot waivers. Before I get into why this flexibility is needed, which is what Sebastian has been introducing, a quick reminder of what slots are and what they mean.
Yep, the next slide, please. Yeah.
Thank you. So just a quick reminder, a slot is a specific time on a specific day for you to have the right to access that airport facility, the runway, the terminal, everything that goes with that operation. You need a separate slot for each arrival and each departure, and each day you also need a separate series of slots. So you can imagine right now the ability to operate 80%, which is what you need to do to retain these airport slots, on each individual series is simply impossible. They're managed in something that we call a series for good reason. It ensures that there is consistency across the network of the schedule that's offered by the airlines to the passengers each season. But as I say, right now, this simply isn't possible to keep this volume of flying to a level of 80%, which is what's required to keep this permission to operate. Airlines have invested for decades in their routes and their destinations and opened new markets through their ability to rely on the airport slot process. But obviously right now, this is not something that they're looking to do. They cannot be investing in operating these routes and destinations when there's simply no demand. And even under normal circumstances, operating and opening new markets costs considerable amounts of money to invest. And they typically look at 2 to 3 years to see a return on these investments. So what they're now critically doing is hoping to preserve what they've invested in pre-COVID for their return and for this very important rebuilding of the schedule structure and also this very vital connectivity. Next slide. So slots are simply an essential element to the smooth running of the global network. And they give the ability for the airline to offer this attractive passenger schedule that provides so much connectivity that we've come to rely on. Operating from a slot-congested airport means that an airline has to be able to plan its schedule one season to the next and months in advance. And to do that, it needs to know which slots it has the right to use again. Passengers benefit from these slots because they ensure that, as I said, the schedule is reliable, connections are well timed, and you can fly from one continent through another onwards to your destination in the quickest and most convenient way possible. Actually, slot times are what airlines have been competing on at these previously congested airports for many years. Airlines can only offer flights at the times they have slots for. And through the slot process, they have this vital certainty that if they are operated effectively, they can rely on planning on those slots the next equivalent season. So summer to summer and winter season to winter season. It also enables them to invest so importantly in their fleet, crew, and which markets they look to open in new seasons. And are airlines usually fighting to get the best slots? Yes. They just fight for the slots that allow them to connect their global network with their partners. But they also need to fight for passengers to create the best yield and loads. And they are what defines, unfortunately, a successful airline nowadays at these very congested airports. What we do have in place to manage this process is the worldwide airport slot guidelines. And it's a process that has driven a fair, understandable, practical and consistent approach globally for many years. Everyone under this system is treated in the same way, fairly and in a non-discriminatory manner. But coming back to today, where we see ourselves in the middle of this crisis is certainly not an industry suffering from congestion anymore. Demand is free-falling and consumers are not booking. So why are we now so worried about airports? We could just go to the next slide. Because if we're not worried now about these airport slots, airlines may lose them as they're unable to operate and the global network could crumble. To have to reconstruct the entire schedule at all of these 200 busiest airports worldwide could cause another crisis. And that would cost countries, economies and consumers dearly as they lose this global connectivity. So beyond this short-term contraction that we've already seen and Sebastian's already explained, we're very worried this could become a longer-term reality. However, if we're able to preserve the slots that we have today in a global way, we're also able to preserve connectivity for the rebuild. As I said, airlines are absolutely in no state to be operating 80% of each individual slot series right now when there's absolutely no demand to satisfy these sorts of schedules. However, everybody's hoping that we can come back and operate them in this fashion in the near future. Could we just go to the next slide? So just to give some basis to what we're talking about in terms of the slot-controlled airports, slot-coordinated airports in good times saw 1.5 billion passengers a year depart from them pre-COVID, and that's at just 200 airports globally. So slot-coordinated airports are very much exposed to international traffic, and it's this traffic that provides connectivity. As we know, the recovery is mainly predicted to come next year from domestic markets, and only 27% of domestic flights depart from level 3 airports, or in other words, level 3 airports, slot-coordinated airports, see and serve 60% of, under usual circumstances, the global international flying network. So could we just go to the next slide? And as IATA at the moment, we're assuming only 25% recovery of international passenger traffic by mid-next year, which means we have a big problem. The slot-coordinated airports will not expect to see the demand they once had to operate all of the slots at their airports. And so for now, the focus for everyone should be on recovering passengers and where they want to fly. So we see the value of flexibility already this summer when we reflect on that small bubble of activity we had in many regions. Although airlines had a full slot waiver, they were required to operate 0% of their slots. As soon as they could operate, quarantine was removed or restrictions taken away. There was an extraordinary jump in demand in some regions. Europe's a good example of this. And where there was this bubble of activity, airlines quickly brought their flying programs back and tried to serve that demand that was present. So even with slot waivers in place and a 0% threshold, the flexibility enabled them to recover very quickly. And this is why waivers are so incredibly important in this regard, because they give the whole environment, the whole situation, complete flexibility to react in an agile manner to where the demand is best seen. So right now, it shouldn't be about operating aircraft movements to retain slots. It should be about operating where there's demand and being able to stimulate this demand in 2021 for recovery. So lastly, if we could go to the next slide, I'd just like to touch on why time is now critical. For airlines and airports, it's now a very, very important period where they are looking at their planning for summer 21. As you can see on the screen, there's a timeline that we all have to work to, and this is detailed in the slot guidelines. Just even last week, we held the virtual slot conference with airlines and coordinators working through their slots and schedules for next summer. And in just a couple of months, actually in the middle of January, airlines are required to finalise their slot holdings for next summer. However, the lack of certainty right now as to what the future slot rules will be for summer makes it even harder for the airlines to make these vital investment decisions that they are making right now about the size of their fleet, their crewing requirements, the maintenance programs they need to be in place, ready to restart next summer. And also for airports, it's critical to understand the volume of the flying program that's being planned for next summer so that they can either reopen or keep terminals closed. And these decisions amount clearly to huge expenditure for the industry, one that's simply on its knees and needs to be very careful about these hugely financial decisions to make sure that there is robust resilience put into the industry next year as we all try to restart and build back these schedules. And this is why, before I just hand back over to Sebastian, that we have to be really clear today that we can't delay the decision making about how we deal with next summer. We do need action now before the end of the year to preserve this air transport network and the slots that will enable the industry eventually to rebuild to a fully connected network again in a realistic manner. So with that, I'll hand back over to Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Lara. So I'll just sum up with the last slide again for our position that we're advocating for, and I'll reverse the order on the slide. I think that other than the flexibility that Lara just explained, the urgency in the decision making is now a hugely important element. You know, as a former CEO of airline, I can tell you that when you run an airline, you have basically two main elements that decide about your competitiveness. It's of course the ticket price, which we had a huge fight always about between airlines. But then you had the schedule, and the schedule comes from the network. So the capacity of quickly and with a lot of time forward build your network. It was what makes the competitiveness of the airlines. And in this time of uncertainty, when markets being closed, open, the regulations are changing, airlines really need to have the time to put flights, see if those flights are selling, and therefore see if they can restore demand. This is why we're so strongly advocating for a maximum flexibility for airlines on the slots, because there is absolutely no room and appetite now for a risk-taking. So if an airline has tougher rules and is about to lose a slot, which is a right that was invested to, and knowing that the projection is that 2022 and onward, the traffic will be back in heavily congested airports, airlines will prefer or not to take the risk or just to put all their efforts on the airports which are congested and just drop the traffic from non-regulated airports, which is of course detrimental to those airports. But this is the state of mind, if I may say, of how how managers are now looking at the airlines, because again, we could develop, and you have a lot of information coming from IATA about financial resilience. Airlines keep asking for support, for financial support. Therefore, they have no appetite to risk this money because the business model of our airlines is absolutely not to come back to government or shareholders to ask for money. Our business model is to fly passengers and makes money on the demand and stimulate the demand, which for us is the main element of the restart part. So in conclusion, of course, IATA will continue advocating. Next week we have the Worldwide Airport Slot Board, and we will be very strongly presenting our case, asking for a timely decision, not like the decisions that were made for the season 2020, but the best would be within the next days to have an agreement on the conditions in which, on recommendation, sorry, it's not an agreement, it's a recommendation that will go to regulators, and then we will advocate toward the regulators to support those conditions, to give our airlines the possibility to restore schedules and restore the demand. Of course, last word, I would love to be wrong. That's quite awkward to say. I would love to be wrong, and to be wrong on our demand projections. I would love to see airlines reopening, more connections and passengers flying, but we have to be realistic. We were not that wrong in 2020. Our projections were exactly what happened to the market. Therefore, we have no reason to believe that it's going to be faster in 2021, but we have reasons to be optimistic because of the vaccine for the seasons 2022 and onward. And I really hope we're really going to spend time not on asking for any form of flexibility or waivers, but we'll really spend time on running congestion, demand, and have the problem of return of passengers to the market. I would really like to have this problem much more than the one that we just presented you. That would be it from our side. Thank you very much for listening us and sharing and following the slides. And I'm turning back to Tony now. If there are any questions, we'll be very glad with Lara to answer those questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sebastian and Lara. We have a couple of questions in the queue. So the first question talks about our prognosis going forward. And basically the question says, how long are we going to hold out hope that the market will return as it was before? And wouldn't it be better to just open it up to competition, and if there are new demand patterns, allow airlines that are able to meet those new demand patterns to have the slots they need to do so?
So should you or should I?
I'm happy from a slots point of view.
Okay, so first of all, our projections are constant, and our forecast on the traffic return are constant since practically mid 2020. We foresee that the traffic will reach level at the winter season 2023, summer 2024, and we've been consistent in saying that we take into consideration a number of elements, and therefore we do not have any reason today, even with again the announcement about the vaccine, to believe that due to the recession, due to the grounding of the fleet, due to the fact that airlines have suffered huge losses and needed help, there will be anything going faster than our projection. Therefore, and Lara mentioned that slots are to manage congestion, but let's manage something that exists. We will not have congestion, and I don't believe there will be numerous airlines stepping in, somebody not flying a certain number of slots. But I'll ask Lara to address this.
Yeah, I think from the point of view, should we just throw the rule book away, if you like, right now and leave it open for everyone? I think there are pockets and isolated examples of some new entry into airports, but actually that's being facilitated by the waiver, in that airlines are required to return the slots that they are not going to operate. And part of the conditions that are being set forward, even as we speak, for next summer, would involve a requirement to be quite upfront from an airline point of view as to what you plan to operate and what should have flexibility given to it. So there are opportunities to access airports at this time, but I think what's really front of our mind and front of the airline's mind is to not, while there is no functioning market really, so to speak, from an international point of view, is not to allow all those precise timings that have stabilised the global network over years of decades actually, of building up this global picture of schedules that come in and match up with the schedules that then depart. If that was all deconstructed in one year next year, it would take many more years to come back to. So it really is about giving some breathing space to actually recover international traffic, and then allow the market to return and stabilise. And I think it's clear we're not going to be asking for this level of flexibility, I hope, even beyond 2021. And actually, even next year, what we're working through with the airports and the slot coordinators isn't a blanket waiver. We're trying to put in place something that is a balance between protecting and preserving the slots that provide the connectivity and allowing access and new entry for those airlines that can perhaps restore their schedules quicker, most likely in regional domestic circumstances. So we're trying to find that balance, and then I think we get back to a point of view where the market actually has stabilised, and then the rules come into play again.
Okay, thanks, Lara. We have a precision on that, or I guess a further question, which says, so instead of blanket waivers or waivers like that, would it not be better to decide on a certain threshold? So when demand arrives at a certain level, then a waiver kicks in, and when it goes above that level, the waiver kicks out.
Yeah, I think without going into the details of what's right now under discussion between the airports and airlines and slot coordinators, that's kind of the direction we're heading in, is something that enables some flexibility and upfront thinking, but also something that recognises there hopefully will be some recovery of traffic. And so the threshold that we have at the moment set at 80% is obviously too high, but something that better reflects the worst case of operating conditions would allow recovery. And just, to push the point again, even with a zero threshold, we saw the recovery of flying this summer. So the threshold isn't what stimulates the flying, actually, the demand is. And so that threshold has to be set at a level that is low enough to match everybody's needs. And those that can fly more will, regardless of what the threshold is.
However, it is important also to underline, again, from an operational and very pragmatic point of view, that we are asking about changing of rules for 32 weeks. So it's very difficult to create regulations which will kick in and kick out within 32 weeks. What we want to achieve is to have airlines, to provide airlines the possibility of planning something stable throughout 32 weeks. Now, let's be very clear. It's not about airlines only, because we are in an ecosystem. We cannot function without airports. We cannot function without air traffic control. We cannot function without handling companies. If we provide them a very flexible network and we say, okay, we're going to react plus 10, minus 10% in summer period, but then September, October, we want different regulations, they won't be able to provide us the service we need. And, airports can close part of the terminal, reopen, and it also has an impact on their finance. So because we are at the beginning of the sale of the ticket process, our assumptions trigger a domino reaction in the system. So we are trying to find the best solution that everybody has a win-win in this situation, but allows airline to eventually, be more inclined to take some risk and stimulate some demand, while knowing that if it doesn't work, they'll not have to pay the price of pulling out and just losing slots for the future traffic 2022 and onward.
There are a few questions that indicate perhaps the process isn't entirely clear. So the questions are we at the stage now where we're making a definite ask of governments, or are we talking to some sort of committee that makes that recommendation to governments? And what is the current status in Europe and around the world? Are airlines subject to the rules, not subject to the rules? And then lastly, I guess it would be, are we talking about a worldwide uniform solution, or is there a regional flavor to it? So that's a lot, but throw that all over to you.
Okay.
Okay, I'll try. Some of them I think perhaps it's easy to start now with the winter season where we are now to give some basis to what we're talking about. At the moment, there is a global, every coordinated airport, those 200 airports, have a global waiver in place. That means that airlines are not subject to the use it or lose it slot rules right now. And that's every airline, every airport that's under this system. What we do have attached to that for this winter are a number of conditions. So one of those, for example, is that you have to return the slots that you're not going to operate subject to a 3 or 4 week deadline. And this is to make sure that everybody in the ecosystem has an ability to understand what airlines are looking to operate and what they're not. So that's how the waiver this winter is working. As we look forward now to the summer season, and as I said, the planning is going on right now for that period, we need governments to support the industry with continuation of a flexible set of rules for slot use. I'm being very careful not to say a continuation of a blanket waiver, which is what we've had last summer and this winter. We're looking for something that's more balanced, but we would want it in place globally. So what we will be coming out and asking for, I hope in a matter of days, when we've had this discussion at what we call the Worldwide Airport Slot Board, which is our committee, our governance body for the slot process right now. Mm-hmm. Once that board's made a decision, and we hope it is one of consensus and agreement between airports and airlines globally, that we can come out to global authorities and request them to follow the recommendations that we will make, and a somewhat technical framework for how we can manage this for the summer season. But we will be clear that we, as an industry, need rules that are consistent on each end of the route. So we need every one of those 200 airports to have the same rules. And we need the finer technical details, the process, everything needs to be done in the same manner as it is usually in the slots process. So government also to give that decision, we hope, at the same time, because if you're returning slots for one end of the network, you need to do the same on the other end of the network.
It's really important, again, to underline that in the governance process, we are only making recommendations. So I think that the wisest way is to sit around the table with the main stakeholders of this process, which is obviously airports and slot coordinators and us as airline, find the best common standard that can be applicable everywhere, because, you know, we have 292 airlines and all the airports represented. So basically, it's about connecting international traffic on long haul through continents. But then once we have this recommendation, our job is to continue convincing the regulators. So let's be clear, the regulators absolutely do not have to agree on our proposals. But of course, I and we believe in IATA that it makes much more sense to come in front of a regulator and saying, the regulator, whoever it is the Ministry of Transport or Civil Aviation Authority, and says, we all agreed and we all find it's fair and it doesn't hamper or doesn't harm anyone. So please follow our recommendation, and we've seen that works. This is why we advocate for us, but of course we are sitting at the table with everybody involved, and we are trying to convince that and to have a common standard worldwide. We do not see now regional standards, because it would be quite difficult, frankly, to fly between Europe and Asia if we have different slot regulations on one end of the route and different regulations on the other end of the route.
Okay. We have a couple questions where people are challenging the unity of the industry. So they point out that Ryanair and Wizz Air have both opposed blanket waivers, and some journalists that are talking to airports who are also not in favor of waivers. So the first question is, how united is the industry really on this issue? And the second is, how do we counter the claims that by making these moves, we're trying to prevent a necessary recalibration of the industry into the post-COVID world?
Okay, so Wizz Air and Ryanair are not part of IATA, and they have different point of view, so that's fair from their part if they voice it. But let me remind that there are mainly European carriers operating within Europe. So on a global scale, they represent few percent of the traffic. Our job as IATA is to is to represent and make recommendation on behalf of our 292 members and have the whole and have the best interest not of any particular airline but of the whole industry. So we might also have disagreements inside our members who might have a different point of view, but our job as association is to find again a global solution. Therefore, I'll address the same comment on airports. Airports also have their own organization, and they also have different point of view among the members. That's fine. But as long as we are trying to work out a solution that is again a recommendation, I find it the best way the best way forward. By the way, on another note, it's a very nice free ride because we are advocating for all the industry, and the non-members are benefiting from the slot waivers. So we could go into details of some of Wizz advantages got because of our negotiations. So it's always funny to notice that. But to be also very serious on the topic of recalibration, I think that we are actually leaving the recalibration of the airline industry. I can hardly understand what would be more than the recalibration that exists today. And airlines are trying to preserve what they have invested in for many years, because again, a slot is an investment, and we maybe do not underline this. It's not something that was given out of the blue to an airline. During particularly the peak banks in biggest airports, airlines were opening connections, and they were losing millions of dollars or any currency they were functioning in to have those slots granted to fly those routes, to open, to stimulate demand. So it's something that is part of the value of the network. So therefore, they are rightfully trying to it's a little like, defending your brand. It's an immaterial thing, but it's still something you invested in. So I believe that in the current situation, the airline industry is recalibrating. Now, is there going to be more recalibration? Probably yes. At the board there will be different discussions on slots once the industry restarts? Yes, I guess yes. Everybody will probably look at those regulations, but let's first fly and then start to change something that was successful for the last 20 years. So that's Lara.
And even just to add that, even right now, as the industry does look to the opportunities it has to recover, you can see very transparently slot allocations even for next summer at this point, and not looking at the UK in particular for any other reason. And the coordinator is very transparent, and you can already see the access that airlines have to Gatwick, Stansted, Heathrow for next summer, and the opportunities that they've put in place. These are brand new routes being offered by brand new entrant airlines. So they're not brand new airlines, but they're airlines entering this market for the first time. And that's happening amongst this crisis. So even with the slot rules being put into a different bracket right now, something that provides flexibility above and beyond anything else, the actual process is consistently still taking place. And that means actually globally the airlines do have a consistent set of standards to work from, and they know that they're being treated fairly. Their application for slots is going into the same queue as everybody else, and where there's capacity, they're being generated that slot allocation. So actually, in some ways, it proves that the process is still working, because this is all still taking place live, even while we're trying to recover the demand.
Okay, we have just a couple more questions here. So we'll try and go through those quickly because we're running up against time. The first question says, since over the last several years, there have been many occasions where the airlines have asked for slot waivers. Is that not an indication that the system itself needs to be more flexible, or to have something embedded in it to deal with these crises, which seem to be not so infrequent these days?
I think it's a good question, and I think we constantly ask ourselves if there are improvements to be made, and we will continue to do that as we come out the other side of this. But let's be clear: waivers have been granted for distinct events. So post-financial crisis, SARS, 9/11, and now this crisis, which clearly is worse than any we've ever experienced before. Should we be looking to be more flexible in terms of slot use? And I think the question there is, are we optimising the use of capacity at congested airports under normal circumstances? And in 2 to 3 years' time, will we be back at that level of congestion? It is right to have a usage rule that requires the airlines to operate their slots at a very high level and achieve 95% plus use of this very congested infrastructure. Obviously, right now, that isn't the case. And I think, therefore, we perhaps need to look at a framework in place so that when and if these kind of conditions arise, we can easily dial up or dial down that threshold and react to the market conditions. But under normal circumstances, there has been no other need to waive this usage requirement.
Okay. And the last question, I thought we would get through an entire briefing without having a Brexit question. We have a Brexit question, and that is, depending on the outcome of the UK EU talks on a post-Brexit settlement, could we see London and Brussels go different ways on the question of slots? And also on a further waiver, and what will that have in terms of consequences for the industry?
Yes, I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. The UK government could, if they're able to, take a different direction on slots to Brussels. Would that be in anybody's interests? I think the answer would be no. Both for the airline community, the airport community, and the UK as a whole. They're one of the most connected cities in London, despite huge levels of congestion. So to divert from the current rules today would seem to be something that wouldn't support the recovery of the industry and certainly wouldn't support the continuation of their leading example of managing slots and congestion. So we will be advocating that they continue to align with the global standard. Of course, they may make small adjustments, and that's quite typical. But I think, as Sebastian said, the guidelines we have today are a global standard because people are not flying just between Europe, they're flying out of London to many other continents, and that whole process of rules has to work together in a symbiotic way.
And to end on a broader topic, of course, when the demand will bounce back and there will be more flights and we'll start the restart, if I may say so. There will be a big thinking that we need to put strategic thinking for IATA and ACI, but slot coordinators, about the change of the industry in terms of the role of the hubs and the super congested airports. Please remember that before the crisis, there was more and more question marks about will the hubs continue to play such a vital role in connectivity, or will we have long-haul, ultra-long-haul flights connecting cities bypassing hubs? We will see what's the impact of the fact that big airplanes has been grounded. The A380, 747 are slowly removed from market. So we will have all those broad questions on how the traffic is going to be structured, and will passengers be willing to spend 19 hours, 18 hours on a plane just to avoid a hub, which in the current situation is a real question. Do you want to meet people in the terminals, etc.? So this all will have undoubtedly an impact on the way we manage the traffic, and therefore on the way of congestion and how to understand congestion. But let's leave this debate for 2022, when, again, as I was saying in my introduction, I would love to be wrong, and I would love to see more demand and have this problem of how to run congestion while we're in a situation of such a decrease in connectivity. That we will be presenting you in detail on another briefing on Wednesday about. I really invite you warmly to join us, because there will be a very interesting number of figures on how the connectivity was impacted because of COVID, and what do we see in the current connectivity map continent per continent.
Okay. And just one last question. How would you characterize the approach of airlines and airports in this crisis? Are they working together to get the industry restarted, or are they working to different visions?
It's a good question. And I think it depends on, there's isolated situations that are obviously business critical for the airlines or the airports in specific circumstances. But I would say as a whole, in the area that I work in slots, there is a real commitment to try and find a consensus that balances everybody's positions, it won't necessarily meet exactly what everybody needs. And that's perhaps the critical issue that we see playing out more publicly. But in terms of a global consensus, I think everybody knows it's on our shoulders now to lead the industry in this regard and find a set of recommendations at a global level to keep the process moving forward. So I think there is commitment there, and I just hope that can be drawn on in the next few days.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So that ends the